transformation. ASSET is a multi-partner initiative led by the University of Victoria. Their mission is to accelerate the global push for resilient and equitable clean energy solutions through community-based collaborations. And BCSEA is proud to be one of the founding members of ASSET. Our speakers this afternoon are Dr. Sinead Early, a critical resource geographer and policy studies scholar at the University of Northern British Columbia, and Aaliyah Jordan, the community coordinator with ASSET. They'll be discussing their findings from their project, engaging with communities across Northern BC to understand the community's perspectives on their energy needs, challenges, and supports needed for energy transition initiatives. Welcome, Sinead and Aaliyah. The floor is yours.
Thanks for that introduction, Diana. And to start by just saying thanks to BCSEA for the opportunity to share our research today. Really excellent to partner, see this partnership between BCSEA and ASSET. Given the work that is done around policy advocacy, public outreach, energy education, it's really nice to bring our efforts together. So also to acknowledge, some of you may have been able to attend a webinar last fall. So I share this work with my wonderful friends and colleagues, Dr. Tamara Krushenko and Dr. Kara Shaw at UVic, and they shared some of this work as we were partway through this first year of research last fall. And so what I'm able to do today for all of you is to sort of round out that first year in terms of what we've been up to and what we've heard from Northern communities, and also to set out what is a much bigger and fuller and very much exciting research program over the next 4 years. I am Sinead Early, Associate Professor, School of Planning and Sustainability here at UNBC. I'm speaking to you today from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Lheidli T'enneh. Also acknowledge that I'm a beneficiary of colonial dispossession on these lands, and it really is through my research, through teaching, through the service work that I do in and for Northern communities that I try to redress historical and ongoing colonial relations, and really try to build something better. So I'll be speaking mostly. I will hand over the mic to Aaliyah Jordan, our community coordinator, for a few of the slides. But really, very excited to bring this research that is supported by the ASSET initiative. But this one's really exciting to see UNBC play a really strong role in partnership with UVic. And also I want to point out with the Community Energy Association, so they're playing a really strong role in sharing this work. And a lot of that has to do with NorthCan. So this is the Northern BC Climate Action Network. I'll speak to it a bit more fully in a few moments. But really those two, NorthCan and the CEA, has also played a really big part in shaping this work. So just to set the context before I get into the research, so climate action and energy transition policies in BC have typically been focused on urban contexts, leading to programs that are inaccessible and unresponsive to residents and communities in Northern BC and in rural and remote BC. But on the flip side of the coin, and what I'm able to engage with on a daily basis and through my work, that climate action and local renewable energy initiatives are awesome across Northern BC. They're happening. They need to be noted. They need to be highlighted. And they also represent a way of doing community energy that is embedded in place, very much driven by local needs and aspirations. And so this is where I point to NorthCan. So it was 2023 that this network to connect across Northern communities really came to be. Now we're sitting at more than 400 individuals from more than 50 communities around Northern BC that work to identify, influence, and implement local initiatives related to climate and energy. I've been involved with the network since its formation in 2023, and it's been really essential to this work. It's really sort of established the grounds through which we've built out this research proposal.
Sinead, I think we've lost your screen share, just so you know.
Okay, you're not seeing my...
I can still see it right now. It's just an image of Atlin that she's talking over.
Perfect, thank you.
No worries.
Sure. Yeah, sorry, I haven't switched forward. So yeah. But on the flip side, so to sort of match this context, the research that we're stemming from this premise that well-designed energy planning has the potential to support community well-being, particularly if attentive to these regional scales and to these regional realities. So that's what the project is about, Northern Regional Energy Dialogues as our first phase of work with communities to design and advance research that will support community agency in shaping their energy futures, that we're really hoping will deliver on this future benefit, or this potential benefit. So the outline for the webinar is really very simple. I'm going to spend some time talking about this first phase of research. And so, you know, spending time in community, hearing from them, producing the reports. There have been, you know, we've produced assets of the research in and of themselves that have been already useful for communities. But one of the really exciting pieces is that we've taken an iterative research approach. So what we've heard during this first year has really driven how we designed the wider research program over the course of the next 4 years. So I'll cover how we're planning to move forward with that, and really happy to hear. Please drop your questions in the Q&A, and we can have some back and forth towards the end of the webinar. I'll pass it over to Aaliyah here in a few moments. We have a growing research team, certainly as we kind of move into the second stage of research. I'll just note that the community coordinator position has been really essential to the success of this first year, to have someone that is dedicated to setting up these conversations with communities, making sure that we document them accurately, and then make sure that we're feeding them into public-facing and community-oriented reporting. So I'll just hand it over to Aaliyah for a few moments to sketch out the wider research team, but also some of the finer details of the data collection over the course of the first year.
Thanks, Sinead. Yeah, so this research project has been really collaborative from the start. The academic leads include Sinead from University of British Columbia, Kara Shah and Tamara Kachanko from University of Victoria, and then the broader team includes Rob Van Atchman and Jen from the Community Energy Association, myself as the research coordinator, Sarah Chitzat, Megan McDonald, and Joel Kerpa, each contributing different forms of research. As Sinead mentioned, this team is expanding quite a bit. There's many more people contributing to the work that aren't highlighted here. And going into the next few years, the project is evolving, and new partnerships, community relationships, and areas of work continue to develop. The project brings together key partner organizations, including Community Energy Association, NorthCan, universities like UNBC and UVic, and then a wide range of local governments, First Nations, industry partners, and community organizations. As we mentioned, the collaborations will continue to grow as we finalize phase 2 and project-related partnership work. Next slide. So the first phase of the project was framed as the Northern Regional Energy Dialogues across 2025 and 2026. Phase 1 had 2 core components, the first being community conversations designed to identify local energy priorities, barriers, capacity gaps, and potential pathways towards energy solutions. And the second is regional workshops, which were meant to support peer learning between communities and help build a collective regional action. This phase has really been a listening exercise. We developed a guidebook to help structure the community conversations, and that has been helpful in facilitating discussions across a wide range of communities. At the same time, we adapted this guidebook in response to the community and how the conversation progressed. One thing we were attentive to was recognizing that some of these communities in the North have already done substantial engagement and energy planning work before we arrived, so our role was not always to restart or duplicate a formal research process, but to listen carefully, build from that existing work, and understand where there was interest in further dialogue or regional connection. Public examples of this kind of prior planning included West Mobile's First Nations, earlier community energy planning work, or Dogue River's community and land use planning processes. At its core, this phase was about creating space for communities to tell us what energy looks like right now in their context, what they want it to look like in the future, and what needs to change to get from here to there. Next slide. Okay, so this slide shows the scope of engagement across the region. Our community conversations have been completed starting in Prince George, January 2025, following with Burns Lake, Kitimat, Smithers, Williams Lake, Mackenzie, and Farmington. That early sequence created momentum in the Northwest that we were able to build on by hosting regional discussion in Terrace. Following that, we continued in Atlin in September 2025, and then Fort St. John, Prince Rupert, and then finally ending in the Northern Rockies, which included a conversation in Muncho Lake, Toad River, and Fort Nelson First Nations. Across these communities, partnerships and local relationships have shaped how this coordination happened. In some places, there are more formal community partners involved. In others, the relationship was more informal. And in every case, we worked with the local knowledge holders who were really essential in making the engagement meaningful. Those local connections helped identify who needed to be in the room, how the conversation should happen, and then how to keep the process really grounded in local context.
Great, thanks, Aaliyah. So one of the pieces in terms of making what we've heard public facing is through these community reports. As I mentioned earlier, they've already emerged as assets in and of themselves. They have emerged as advocacy pieces. There's some cases, for instance, in the Northern Rockies. The Northern Rockies Regional Municipality is currently undergoing an update to their regional energy planning. And so we just joined forces and we're sort of doing this community engagement work together. So the reports will be very useful in terms of that long-term strategic planning. Another really interesting example, the conversation in Williams Lake, and not to say that momentum wasn't already moving in the region, but after that conversation in Williams Lake, there was the formation of the Caribou Climate Circle. So as a sort of galvanizing point in more collective sort of networking in particular regions. Another really great example, one of the participants in the Mackenzie workshop has now used the report as a teaching tool. So actually teaching a course on mining potentials through for communities in and of themselves. And so right now, we just finished, so our last visit to the Northern Rockies was just 2 weeks ago. So I'm still working with those transcripts and that data and what we heard, but we're really finally rounding out this first really year. It's actually a year and a half of engagement, which is really exciting. And so we're on the verge of this regional analysis, so really identifying key learnings so far, and common challenges, because that's really going to influence our work going forward. But what I want to spend time on in the next few minutes is actually important differences. So I'm actually going to sketch the picture from a few of these community engagements, not all of them, just to have time for a few. But this is an element that really underpins the research in a major way. We really see that there's positive potential if future energy systems are more attentive to and influenced by place and very specific geographic context. It's certainly imperative in northern regions with highly punctuated seasons, extreme highs and lows, right? We see very specific climate change impacts in the region, whether it be wildfire, permafrost thaw, and we need very specific energy solutions to match that. And also what underpins this is that there's an imperative for community leadership and involvement. So I'm going to start with that. These sketches of a few places we were in, and I'm certainly sort of handpicked the conversations that I led because we have sort of spread this across the research team. And then I'll move on to the regional picture after that. Just to start with Burns Lake, that is on this page, very much characterized as an energy transportation corridor that's about, I quote, energy transport to elsewhere. So very much energy in the community is influenced by hydropower. Of course, they sit on the edge of the Nechako Reservoir, but they're also a transmission corridor for pipelines, as also rail lines. This is a case where local government leadership, so staff at the town is really strong. So one of the things that Aaliyah alluded to was that the success of a lot of these conversations actually really depended on a key local contact that sort of set us up with, how to get the right people in the room and to sort of frame up frame up the context for discussion. And so as the director of research or the director of recreation in Burns Lake, as well as the director of finance, you'll actually hear quite a bit about rec centers in the next few minutes. They are community hubs. They are where people gather. They are sort of locusts of activity in northern communities. And so often you'll see staff or directors of recreation that are actually very keyed into thinking about energy solutions for these communities. This is an image from Kitimat. I know Tamara spoke to this case a little bit back in the fall, an image with Tamara here and Candace Wilson from the Haisla Nation, who is the environmental manager. Really interesting in Kitimat. So there's community members involved, local government and industry stakeholders. But really one of the key themes here is that there is this power gap that is asymmetrical between local stakeholders and industry with no intermediary organization. So of course, you have the impact of the Alcan aluminum smelter, as well as LNG processing facilities. A quote from this conversation: if you think you're solving a climate crisis in your footprint, having an EV in Kitimat, while our two industries burn about 1.5 million times the energy input that you will ever save or ever use on an electric vehicle. It's economies of scale. We're all involved here. We turn our back on the elephant in the room, which is this town only exists because it consumes unbelievable amounts of energy. So the role of big industry, of course, has a heavy influence in a lot of northern towns. This image that you saw earlier, so this is beautiful, stunning photography from Atlin. Really interesting place. So non-integrated, not connected to the BC electrical grid. Also unincorporated, so they don't have that sort of local. They don't have a local government mechanism. So this is one of the key themes here. So governance gaps. So one of the key desires in Atlin right now is to develop sort of governance or some type of collective representation for energy planning. An equity approach came up in this conversation quite a bit. So, stating the fact that not all households can weather the storm of unreliable power, rising and unpredictable costs of power in the same way. A quote from Atlin engagement: if the power goes out, those people are in crisis, especially for elderly folks or communities with vulnerable populations. Reliability impacts different populations differently, especially communities with different demographics. Atlin is also a really exciting case in that they provide 90% of power to the community through a really amazing run-of-river hydro project. So this is owned and operated by the Taku River Tlingit First Nation. It's a 2.1 megawatt hydroelectric power generating facility. It was built in 2009, harnessing the stream flow from Pine Creek between Surprise Lake and Atlin Lake. We actually did a sort of field trip with the local school while we were up there. Really amazing to see the infrastructure from top to bottom. It's 100% Indigenous owned, so first of its kind in Canada. Developed and operated by Taku River Tlingit First Nation. So all Tlingit citizens are shareholders. Really interesting in that they're sitting in front of what people are framing out as an Atlin hydro expansion project. So Yukon Energy is actually a potential buyer. They're trying to meet the Yukon Grid's winter renewable shortfall. So there's work on this sort of expansion project in Atlin that might be able to serve those needs. So this is a really interesting case in terms of regional energy planning, also being very much about regional economic planning. So this is one thing we're trying to bring together in this work, is like overlaying these strategies in terms of regional energy economy planning. But also to note, in Atlin, they're not meeting peak demand. So they are looking for some more solutions to try and support this hydro infrastructure. So they're looking at perhaps expansion, battery storage, and also thinking about solar capacity to reduce the diesel dependence and increase this self-sufficiency. So just quickly, a quote from Atlin, the Atlin engagement, another one: energy systems that are locally owned, so the profits come home to Atlin, and we don't have money leaking out of the community for basic services that we have to buy. That's what we'd like to see. Just three more specifics. Farmington, really interesting case in the Peace region. Here it's all about cumulative impacts. So they have weathered the storm. They've undergone this really fast-paced, really intensive development around liquefied natural gas, over the course of the last 15 or 20 years. And now they're on the front end of a very similar industrial boom related to industrial scale wind energy. So foremost in Farmington people's minds is lease negotiations. So industry actors, so there's this competition for sort of land use. Lease negotiations with very little legal support. So there's a high level of confusion and also retraction around regulatory support. This is also, of course, within the permitting streamlining, the context of permit streamlining legislation that really has proliferated across Canada in 2025, 2026. In BC, this came in the form of Bill 14, of course, the Renewable Energy Project Streamlining Permitting Act, as well as Bill 15, the Infrastructure Projects Act, really aiming to facilitate faster project and energy transmission infrastructure approvals. And this has left Farmington, this is very clear communications, it's left this community quite vulnerable. So they're dealing with industry actors that are knocking on their doors, requests for lease with little documentation as to what the social and environmental impacts will be. And they're also at the same time bearing the costs of legal fees and legal support to help them navigate this current boom. This is, again, another image of us sitting in the rec center. So these are like these town halls. This is very often where we hosted our community engagements. This town won a Community Leadership Award from the North Central Local Government Association in 2025 for a really interesting, really impactful for this rec center heat recovery system. So capturing this waste heat from the ice arena to warm the pool and other facility spaces. Reducing the need for the facility's natural gas boilers, and then to offset the electrical demand of the heat pump, 129 kilowatt solar array was installed, projected to generate 146,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per year. So another really interesting case of recreation facilities sort of moving the mark on renewable energy installations. Common theme here that we heard a lot of while we were in Fort Nelson last week as well, that they're really having to navigate economic transition following mill closures. So huge impact here in Mackenzie is reductions in the industrial tax base. And so a priority for this community is to identify and attract new investors to the community. Other priorities discussed, energy reliability and grid resilience. So blackouts and brownouts in this community. We've heard this across a lot of our other northern engagements, but particular concern over wildfires, right? Mackenzie is at the end of the highway. There's one road in and out. They're also really keen to hear, and this is common across a lot of conversations, they're just keen to gain access to more information on small scale solar, wind, and bioenergy systems. And lastly, just the sketch of what we heard in specific places. Northern Rockies, obviously very unique in that they are operating on their own grid, so they are not connected to the full BC grid. The Fort Nelson grid operated by BC Hydro, and there is a transmission line to Alberta, so they do sell power to Alberta. A lot going on here because we also did spend time, as Aaliyah said, in Toad River and Muncho Lake. The energy situation looks very different in those communities. Toad River is a diesel generator run by BC Hydro. Muncho Lake is also diesel generators, but not supported by BC Hydro. So owner-operators are running those and bearing those extremely high and fluctuating costs on their own. But Fort Nelson is a really interesting case. So a key concern for them is the unreliability of the current grid system. So they've got frequent outages, both planned and unplanned. Even here, the community speaking about the current energy system as risk. So it was just 2 years ago that the Parker Lake fire happened, very hard on the community, a really huge impact. That's where a tree fell on the power line that triggered that particular wildfire. So there's a link between energy systems and wildfire and emergency response here. And then they're also pointing to really significant barriers to resource development. So lack of infrastructure and also policy and regulation that is working against them. Quote from the community, the biggest barrier to capacity is that decisions are being made for us without us. And as much as we try to raise our voices, it often feels as though we're shouting in the wind. You know, that sort of sentiment came up repeatedly. At the same time, they're really interested. They're really interested in integrated and small scale power generation. So there's geothermal potential in the region. People are interested in solar, and there's a lot of conversation about forestry. Of course, there was a very significant downturn in forestry activity, Canfor closing in 2007, I think, but that there's still a lot of expertise and knowledge and interest in thinking about bioenergy systems in the Northern Rockies region. So those are the place-specific, geographically specific sort of community pieces, but some of the key themes that we've heard across the region. So we still have to do some kind of deeper analytical work to sort of really kind of pull this into one schematic and sort of tell the story of Northern BC more broadly. But these are the key findings that we've heard. So of course, this concern over the reliability, communities, they do more blackouts and brownouts are more frequent in rural settings, which often places the burden on homeowners or individuals to running of generators, et cetera. They're concerned about the long-term viability as well as environmental impacts of current energy sources. The cost, I should also say the cost, and I think that's the long-term viability piece here, is that you know, energy costs more in remote communities, and particularly given the geopolitical tensions that we're navigating right now that are changing on a daily basis, there's a lot of concern over supply chain, right? So the cost of diesel, as well as the expectation that diesel will keep coming up the road to fuel those generators, as an example. Communities seeking greater agency. So this is a really key theme. So the idea or the concept of energy independence and energy sovereignty came up, I would say, across the board in all our community conversations. So they're really wanting to be involved. They want to play a stronger role in terms of how energy systems are designed. Innovative energy systems is central to regional economic planning. So this is, I'll sketch it out in a few moments. This is one of the bigger key components of our research going forward. But this is what people are interested in. They want to, you know, where are the jobs? Where are the sort of, in what ways can energy still inject investment and support livelihoods so that people can live and work and play in place in northern regions. So this economic development piece is pretty strong. A lot of things expressed around capacity. We know capacity can mean very different things for very different people, but here a lot of people speaking towards lack of skilled professionals and technicians. Also knowledge. So there's a call out for a lot of, for increased energy literacy, just kind of writ broadly. But also a really important piece here is that people are asking, they're needing support in their decision making. Like, what's the better energy source? What's the better energy infrastructure that we need for our communities? And they're looking for trusted information on this. So non-proponent driven sources of information about energy options and technologies. And what we mean by that is there's a significant mistrust of information coming from government, and there's also some mistrust of information coming from industry. So this is where, you know, researchers and universities can fill that gap. These uneven power relations make collaboration challenging. You know, as I sketched in the Kitimat case, although this is in other places as well, Strong industry proponents are heavy producers as well as users of energy, but there's limited capacity within local government or elsewhere in the community to advance energy initiatives. The second bullet point, very much we're hearing a lot about kind of overlap, what we're framing up as sort of nexus work. So people are talking about energy and food at the same time, or they're talking about energy and forests at the same time. So this sort of need for a greater understanding of how, you know, solving some of our food and energy issues can be twinned or integrated, in the same thing with food and forestry issues. Education and research. So this role needs to be, the role of institutions needs to be better understood. So particularly going forward, we're focused on post-secondary institutions in Northern BC. So that's the 4 colleges as well as UNBC. How can these institutions pivot, collaborate, work together to better support low carbon transitions? Of course, there's a strong desire to retain students in the north and trainees in the north, right? This is, at least speaking on the part of UNBC, this is part of our origin story. And just the role of public education more broadly, particularly related to the call for a cultural shift, because this idea of culture shift came up in a lot of the conversations as well, right? To foreground these new perspectives, not on the technology side, or the source side, but on energy consumption. So I should say that there was certainly a lot of conversation about conservation and efficiency and really rethinking our levels of consumption. Some of that conversation was stronger in some communities more than others. Prince George, that was a pretty key theme. And then lastly, this deep desire for community to community and regional collaboration. And this is part of NorthCan's origin story, right? People want to know what's happening in adjacent communities. They're interested in collaborating with other communities that share common traits, and that are pursuing shared energy and economic opportunities. So there is this desire, you know, one of the sort of qualities that led to NorthCan's formation is that, you know, isolation is really pulling some of these communities together. And, you know, in terms of resourcing and staff turnover, and that are really struggling to move the mark on energy systems or climate action in their communities. And so being able to link up with other communities that are experiencing similar things has been really powerful and really galvanizing for them. So mobilizing the work, just a few pieces, or flag a few pieces for you. So of course, we've got some academic outlets. We've been presenting at conferences. Last summer was the BC Studies Conference. In a few weeks, we're going to be in Victoria, the Canadian Association of Geographers annual conference. We're really quite proud of and think we've been pretty innovative in our methods here, like really, being very adaptive and sitting down with communities and really helping, you know, using those conversations to really frame our work going forward. And so we have put those sort of methodological choices and sort of values as well as outcomes into a publication in the Journal of Community Practice. And some webinars I presented to the North Central Local Government Association about a month ago. Really great to be able to do that with BCSEA as well. I'm just going to point to one other piece that we've pushed out into the public sphere. So we're also trying to influence policy decision makers. Tamara Koshenko works really closely with folks at the Institute for Research on Public Policy. So just to point to one of our more recently published articles that is really, oops, sorry, just lost my... That is really speaking to the major mega projects approach that we're seeing from the federal government level, and of course this is huge in Northern BC, right? Because this is you know, Northern BC is the host to so many of these energy sources that so many British Columbians rely on, whether that be large scale hydro, oil and gas, also thinking about forestry. But really speaking to this sort of Canada's renewed embrace of industrial policy and mega projects really is telling us that there's this very pointed shift towards this nation of builders strategy. But really what we're speaking to in this piece is that a test of its success is whether it can support lasting community-led prosperity in regions that depend on natural resource extraction or energy generation. And we're saying that, mega projects can only support that kind of grounded sovereignty if they're embedded in robust regional development strategies that are defined with communities, not merely in our name. We go on to define 5 pillars of a framework that we think will help us do that. Community-led planning is really important. Governments need to support long-term planning in susceptible regions so that large investments align with locally articulated futures rather than short-term project cycles. Community capacity is huge. Thinking about local governance and implementation capacity as core infrastructure, right? Not just physical infrastructure. We need those governance systems in place. Investing in the people and institutions that allow communities to negotiate, plan, and deliver. Local wealth generation. This has come up again and again in a lot of our community engagements over this last year. Revenue sharing, a greater percentage of the benefits from these resource extraction sectors. Northern communities have been calling for this for decades and decades. So thinking about industrial strategies that include mechanisms to keep more value in the region, whether it's through ownership, rents, stronger local economic linkages, so that places that are export corridors can also build local wealth. The last 2 pillars, comprehensive project review and effective risk management. That last one, just thinking about, institutionalizing rigorous risk management tools for mega projects. The people need to know these just basic elements, right? About cost, schedule, as well as benefits. All right, I'll move to wrap up shortly, just in the next few minutes. And as I said, really keen to try and field some answers to your questions. So I hope some of them are being dropped in the Q&A. If you haven't done so yet, please do so. But this is the last few slides here are just speaking to the design for our research going forward. So the second phase of research is called Power for People, Community Energy for Northern BC. We started with these sort of simple, they're not simple, but we sort of tried to lay them out as simply as possible, actually representing some pretty complex needs for Northern communities, these assumptions. So economy and well-being. So Northern communities are wanting to see energy as a pathway for community building, but also for regional economic development. The agency piece, greater community trying to figure out pathways for greater influence or control over energy decisions. And of course, this assumption around place-based, that energy systems that reflect Northern geographies and histories and cultures will be more successful. So it's a pretty ambitious scope of work. We've kind of portioned it out into 2 key themes. The first one is capacity development, and the second key theme is policy and planning, and we have 4 sub-themes within each. I'm leading in a lot of facets this first theme around capacity development. Here, we're just really trying to pull out the skills, knowledge, and networks for community-driven energy transition and really strengthen this local agency leadership and collaboration. The first sub-theme, strategic decision-making, I'm really calling this community strategies. So how are community, trying to offer support in terms of how community energy initiatives are financed, regional working groups to try and just build momentum around certain initiatives. There's a lot going on here, and a lot of these will be framed out of case studies that stem from some stronger partnerships that we established during the first year of work. Skills and training, that's that educational component and post-secondary institution component that I spoke to a few moments ago. This is where we're really hoping to work with Northern institutions to try and strategize a plan to try and feed, to try and build out our programming that will feed into energy transition. Community scale dialogue and energy politics, Dr. Kara Shaw is leading on that piece. And peer networks is also really exciting. This is how we're hoping to support the sort of networked nature of how things, or the network, the way that networks can support how things get done in northern BC. So this is doing a bit more work around NorthCan, trying to solidify its structure and its long-term sustainability by looking at how other peer networks are successfully moving the mark on energy and climate action in other parts of the world. So that's a really exciting sub-theme as well. And then lastly, Tamara Kushenko is leading most of these sub-themes in large part. So I can't speak to them in quite as much depth, but she's starting, and this is where the research team is building out with this territorial analysis, which will just be a sort of statistical, wholesome, kind of full picture foundation of understanding, demographics, just understanding the context in which we're trying to move implementation on some of the other aspects of our research. Policy interactions, regional energy economy planning, and then also there's a focus here on circular economy planning with an industrial focus. So really, this is all about kind of bringing pieces together that will enable, build these regional policy or advanced regional policy and planning frameworks that will enable community energy transitions and circular economy approaches. So I'll leave it at that. I'm very happy to hear from Diana if you want to pull some questions out of the Q&A for me, and I can also take a quick look through.
Great, thank you, Sinead and Aaliyah. This was a really great presentation, and I hope we can host you for future webinars as you again move forward with the research and the follow-up work that you have planned. So we are open for questions. Please post them in the Q&A box. And one of the first ones was, have you been working with communities that are exposed to critical minerals mining, processing, and manufacturing, both upstream and midstream, especially for lithium batteries here in BC? And I will just add a little note. When it comes to critical minerals, advanced processing and refining, that is actually largely done by China, which is why China has such a strong global control of the critical mineral supply chain. But in terms of the raw material sourcing, I mean, that is global. But I'll pass it to you, Sinead, to answer.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I probably can't speak to lithium specifically, and I think Diana offered some good context there in terms of processing and manufacturing. But certainly, so we're working more closely with communities in the Upper Skeena region, so that's the Hazeltons region and in Gitxsan territory. And so that's probably the case study that is more closely linked to this question, because certainly, so the sort of the upper sort of Skeena region, of course, is seeing some pretty significant rise in sort of mining activity in that sort of Golden Triangle area. And so a lot of community members are linked in terms of labor. So a lot of people are working in mines and they work in the camps. So there's that connection for sure. And so there are a lot of conversations in that area that are focused around the sort of the impact or the growth of the mining sector within those watersheds. But that's that's all I can sort of speak to in regards to that. I know that Tamara Kushenko has done some more work with Indigenous communities in northern mining regions, particularly in Northern Ontario, I think. So she might be someone that would be really great to reach out to.
Our next question, with regards to the cost of energy, do you find that communities have no control of the price of the fossil fuel they use? And is that a significant concern for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us feel like I think none of us have control over the cost of fossil fuels at this point in time. And so I think the longer your supply chains, the higher the cost. So yes, cost has come up as like a foremost concern for a lot of these remote communities. So a sense of helplessness for sure, and lack of control over cost, but also I would say there is also skepticism around market prices and price setting. So I think we heard in a few conversations that they just want to see transparency in terms of what price point is placed on what product, and people feel that they don't have any access to that information. Another case to point to is, and it's just fresh in my mind because we just returned from the Northern Rockies region, Muncho Lake. These are folks that are, filling and maintaining their own diesel generators to keep their operations up and running. So these are we spoke largely to lodge operators in the region. And these rising and unpredictable costs can be make and break for them. Like it is absolutely central to their viability as a business. If the prices and they don't have a lot of cushion to fall back on. So if they're going to see one operator in particular, right, if they're going to see much higher sort of rises or spikes in those in the price of diesel, then it will make the viability of their business very challenging.
So what challenges did you notice in the communities that you visited that community members may not have explicitly spoke about, or may not, consciously be aware that are their challenge, but you've observed as being potential challenges?
Yeah, so sorry, just to rephrase that. So challenges that we see as sort of listeners that haven't been explicitly pointed out by folks in the room?
Yeah, exactly. So for an example, when I did some work in West Africa and we're doing community consultations, and again, of course, the community members, expressed a number of concerns and challenges that they have. One of the things they didn't mention, but what we noticed, is the lack of protein in their diets. They didn't identify that as a problem, but we did. And of course, protein, and especially with some of the fatty acids associated with that, really important for brain health development in young children, avoiding malnutrition. And without that basic health, that at an individual level, you don't have the capacity for doing any broader community development, economic development to help for healthy community development and whatnot. So actually creating a fish farm to improve that protein sourcing in the local food supply was a big part of what we did in the development of the mine I was working on. But again, that was a deficiency / challenge that we observed in the community, but the community itself did not recognize. Mm-hmm. And so is there something similar to that you observed in some of these communities, but the communities themselves don't recognize yet?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the one thing I would speak to would be linked to this kind of sort of regional economic development piece. And so, I'll just, this is is just that, I think there's also a strong interest in energy innovations in the region, like in terms of clean tech or renewable technology. But we're also just not, we very often see the research and development and sort of also provincial level investment is still very much concentrated in Vancouver, Victoria, and now we're seeing a lot of it in Kelowna. There's some really interesting and innovative stuff happening around, hydrogen, for instance, and some biomass and bioenergy stuff in Prince George. We have a long history of that here. But I think there's a sort of underlying, if we're thinking about some pretty major shifts in some traditional resource sectors, forestry is a perfect sort of case in point that, our traditional lumber, our traditional forest products are no longer going to be bread and butter for communities, but something else could be. So I think there's an appetite for sort of sector reorientation, especially if we're just kind of speaking about forestry, but that there isn't that there isn't that foundation or that sort of momentum around investment in innovation in the region, right? It's still very much this expectation that Northern BC will be the source of energy or the source of raw materials, but it also can be the locale or the location of technological innovation. But we just don't have that higher level of investment. Like we're getting kind of small portion investment, I think, at the municipal level. You know, you've got the LGCAP funding and all this sort of stuff to try and spurn, like, to try and promote and sort of support kind of small scale renewable energy installation, for instance. But I think there's sort of a bigger level of investment in the region that really could support that regional economic development piece that we're seeing. You know, we're going to see some gaps in traditional sectors, and it could be filled in really interesting ways if we had, you know, a bit more attention paid to how research and development and innovation could be supported in the region. It's just one thing that comes to mind.
Do you think the kind of the economics of how to kind of build and develop, there's a scale aspect to when it comes to building projects where there's a base cost that's involved regardless of how big the project is? And of course, the bigger the project, the easier it is to spread that cost out and improve the, you know, the profit margins essentially, which, you know, we are talking about for-profit kind of organizations developing any energy projects up in the north. But with smaller communities that are more widely spread, that base cost is really quite high compared to scale. And is that something I would expect that's kind of one of the big challenges for the transition, particularly in northern communities.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But is anyone kind of looking at how to work around that? Because I'm guessing one of the challenges is going to be these communities being able to access that capital to do anything.
Yeah, for sure.
Are they anyone kind of looking at that particular challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you totally hit the nail on the head in terms of one of the capacity challenges that communities have is access to capital. And so, yeah, trying to come up with some and trying to just investigate some creative approaches to that. Energy cooperatives is one sort of framework that we're looking at. You know, we have the Peace Energy Cooperative as a really interesting example in the Peace region in northern BC that has, you know, have brought some really great projects to communities. So absolutely, you're very right. The sort of access to capital is one of the largest barriers for some of these small communities. And so we're trying to think about, okay, if we can kind of approach some of these things regionally and sort of expand that sort of demographic numbers based, right? So it's just communities can't do this on a one by one sort of basis. And so this is the idea behind sort of building a regional hub or a regional fabric that can maybe open up a few opportunities in terms of accessing that capital that is hindering a lot of visions for what people want to see for energy in their communities, for sure.
So how does the provincial energy policy framework that we have at the moment, how is that, you know, helping or hindering, you know, this aspect of it and perhaps in other aspects of the energy transition for northern communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we just saw the Clean BC review, and like, I think there is an attempt, at least nominally or symbolically, to try and regionalize policy, this recognition that, you know, solution pathways are going to look very different in rural and remote and Indigenous communities. And so I think the province has named that in terms of how they're going to actually sort of financially and sort of through capacity support that. It's still definitely a little unknown. You know, there's a lot of really interesting examples where I think, you know, there's also where we're seeing kind of provincial, through that sort of recognition of regionalisms, are trying to accommodate northern communities. So I think about the STEP code, for instance, like, you know, one of the sort of moves in the Clean BC review is to like, okay, well, we actually, you know, maybe because you know, it's a bit more challenging up there, we're actually going to reduce the expectations around STEP code for northern communities. But that's not necessarily a positive path forward. We're actually seeing, in terms of building and construction in northern BC, that because of the high cost of energy, that builders are actually building beyond STEP code because it makes sense. It's what people want, and it also makes sense in terms of the cost of energy. And so, you know, that type of approach to regionalizing is actually further distancing what communities and what leaders in northern communities are actually trying to do. So, yeah, it's you know, I think it's really challenging to you know, we definitely need to nuance provincial level policy so that it makes sense for rural and remote communities. You know, the electrification of heavy duty and medium-sized vehicles, for instance, like that is a major impact on industry and business in northern BC that is linked to the resource sectors. And so, you know, I think there's people that are, and there's companies that are interested in getting on board and navigating that transition, but a lot of them don't have enough information to do so. Like they see this policy land at the provincial level, like that there are targets in terms of transitioning these particular vehicles, but it's not very clear in terms of, you know, what the impact or the cost is going to be in terms of what a particular business or company has to bear. So those are just a few pieces that come to mind for me.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. This was really fantastic. But that, unfortunately, that's kind of all the time we have today. So I do want to thank our audience for your questions, and thank you, Sinead and Aaliyah, for generously sharing your time to tell us about your research. If you've enjoyed today's presentation or believe in our mission, please consider becoming a member or making a donation at bcsea.org. Our next webinar in our research series will be in June, and I believe it'll be one of Sinead's colleagues in the asset collaboration sphere who will be presenting in June. Please watch for our announcements about this and other events and webinars at bcsea.org. Thank you for attending, and enjoy the